what to do.
If what you're feeling is really true.
Is really true. Is it really true?
Just keep your ideas safe and sound.
Safe and sound. Safe and sound.
That's exactly how change is found.
Change is found. Change is found. I'm not an addict, I'm just an ass. And in time, this too shall pass. I'm not an addict, I'm just an ass. Jerry Petito taught
No,
the
I'm
class.
sorry. Just
I'm
saying.
not an addict, I'm just an ass. Loves the answer, the greener grass. I'm not an addict, I'm just an ass. One day at a time, free at last.
Woo. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jerry Petito Show on HamiltonRadio.net. So this is really cool. I got to start a little earlier. I've got an incredible guest. Doc G from Hamilton Radio, one of the owners. Actually, he started Hamilton Radio. He's going to be co-hosting for this guest. Tell everyone when you started Hamilton Radio.
Oh, my God, 1996, 97, I started this radio station.
In your basement, right?
In my basement, yes. And it just grew to this monster type of thing.
How cool. You close that door.
Yeah.
Because I could hear that.
Sure.
So I have my guest on the line. Jordan, say hello.
All right. Hello. Hi, Jerry. I'm sorry I can't be there in the studio with you, but I was all involved in trying to put together a film deal, and you know how much fun that is.
That's awesome. So, everyone, I want to introduce Jordan Rhodes. You know what I'm going to do, Jordan? I'm going to read your poem first, because then this will really give everyone an idea of everything that you've done in the last 5 decades, okay?
Okay.
Let's do it. My guest tonight will blow you away. Honored at Comic-Con to meet him that day. This man is a legend. His career's been insane. Made his debut in '68. Jordan Rhodes is his name. His career spans 5 decades, 45 years later, that's right. He played over 200 roles, all-time greatest actors on sight. Played with Sean Penn, Mia Farrow, and John Wayne, Michael Douglas and Dennis Hopper, Gene Hackman, too. Insane. There's plenty more. The list don't end. Wait till you hear all his roles, my friend. Bonanza and Barnaby Jones, Heart to Heart and Dawson's Creek, Law and Order, and Maroon, Paint and Place on every week. The Rockford Files and Quincy, Guiding Light and Ryan's Hope, Marcus Welby, MD, and Bums, All the King's Men were dope. The quintessential working actor, Jordan Rhodes is known as, but he prefers blue collar, his acting jobs he has. The man, the myth, the legend, Jordan co-wrote and stars on set alongside actress Lynn Moore, who's also his wife, who I met. He plays Ernest Hemingway, a tribute to this man. What an incredible role for Jordan Rhodes to land. There's so much more to cover. Jordan Rhodes, please take the floor. Let's get this interview started. My listeners and I want more. So that's for you, Jordan.
Well, once again, you show your poetry powers there, young lady. So that's I'm telling you, I've had poems. I don't know if I had anything written about me, but that's kind of nice. It's a pleasure to be with you guys. I don't know, how's the weather in New Jersey? The weather over here in New York's pretty nice.
Today was beautiful.
Yeah, it was a nice day. Yeah.
Today's beautiful.
Yeah, it was 50 something over here, so that was great.
Yesterday,
and I was spending a good part of today in conference calls with some people out of Boston that, like a lot of these people, are claiming that they will find us some funds for these 2 little films that I want to do. So we'll see. In the meantime, I'll go on and do. You certainly know Jerry Nolan. I think Jerry, you know him from he has Yesteryear Entertainment.
Yep.
Did I lose you?
Hi, I can hear you now. Yes. Nope, you didn't lose me.
Oh,
yes.
Okay. Yeah, Jerry is he's putting together some things from appearances from me with my blue collar presentation, which is basically Conversations of a Blue Collar Actor, where I show a few film clips, well, more than a few. I think the montage is about 50. And then I talk to the people about just what my career has been like, starting out on a tobacco farm in North Carolina and winding up at a cocktail reception at Buckingham Palace, hosted by Prince Philip. So
That's crazy.
There you go. That in itself should be a book.
That's crazy. That's incredible. So, all right. So I have some questions, but before I get into these questions, I want you to just share with everyone a little bit about your life, your career, from back then till now. Share some really cool tidbits for us.
Okay, well, some of them are kind of X-rated, so I probably can't do those on the radio. I maybe clean them up a little bit, but yeah, I came to New York. First of all, I came to Baltimore in about 1956 and won a scholarship to the Baltimore College of Theatrical Arts, which at that time I believe was called I don't know, the New Theater School, or it had some other name, but I went in there to just see about signing up, and they had me read a few things, and wound up giving me a scholarship. And I wound up doing summer stock with them in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. And from there, I worked with a director who I can't take too much time in telling the story about him, but he had a very unique way of getting his actors to pay attention to him. And his name was Bill, and Bill was very, I don't know, he really liked my talent, and he kept telling me I needed to go to New York, I needed to go to New York. And I was doing pretty well in Baltimore in those days as a young leading man. So Bill, unfortunately, went into the hospital without telling anybody for a very simple operation. Some things developed, and the next thing you know, he passed away. And so when I heard that news, I don't know, it just kind of sparked me. So I came on up to New York and started my acting career in New York, as most young actors do, working a lot of side jobs at Radio City Music Hall and selling magazines door to door, and working in Lou Shao's restaurant as a host, for which I got fired for taking tips. But anyway, just those kind of jobs. And then I started getting some little I did some off-Broadway shows, and then I started getting some little roles on television, shows at the time like The Defenders, which starred E.G. Marshall, and The Nurses, For the People, The Reporter, Mr. Broadway, which starred Craig Stevens. I think The Reporter starred Bill Shatner. Oh. And I was doing okay with that, but then the film business back in those days here in New York just kind of dried up. Plautus Productions was out on the island, and they kind of stopped. They just didn't have any productions, so I decided to make the move to California. And I moved out to California and got very lucky. They hired me for one little role on what's the Peyton Place. They hired me for this little role on Peyton Place, and I did it in. I think I got out there in like November, and I got hired on this little role on Peyton Place in December. And for some reason, I impressed the director, who was Eva Maria Saint's husband, and they decided in February of the following year, I did that in January, that they were going to put a recurring role of an intern on the show. And the director went to bat for me and said, I work with a young actor out of New York from Lee Strasberg, the Actor Studio, blah, 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 all that stuff. And so they brought me out, and they gave me the recurring role as the intern on Peyton Place, and that's where I got to work with people like Mia Farrow. And there's actually a film festival going on right now with, holy mackerel, her name has just escaped me, a wonderful actress that did the Detective Story, and they've got a film festival here in New York, and I actually worked with her on that show on Peyton Place. And that just from there, I just kind of kept banging around and started doing different television shows. And finally, Sean Penn's father, Leo Penn, who had been quite a director in his own right here in New York, but he was a director out there. And for some reason, my agent at the time absolutely just chased him around. Leo told me he even chased him in the men's rooms, trying to get him to read me for something and to take a look at me. And so finally Leo did. He brought me in and read me for a role and liked me. And so against all odds, with a lot of the players there that were under contract, the contract players, there was this role in a Marcus Welby. That was the first Marcus Welby show they ever did, which was based on a true story about this young guy, Bobby Hershey, who was a truck driver, and he had an accident, and of course it paralyzed him. And there was a young girl that had been a reporter, and she came down with spinal meningitis, and she wound up in this rehabilitation hospital and met Bobby Hershey. And of course, she fell in love with Bobby Hershey, and he just realized that her educational background and everything was way above his pay grade. And so when he finished his rehabilitation there, he got out of the hospital and basically left her. And that young lady, by the way, went on to actually be quite a writer, and she got married and had kids and all that, even though, she too was paralyzed. But in that show, I got nominated for an award for that Marcus Welby, and knocking on wood, any that I can find around here. That just kind of started me working back in the very late 60s, and by 1974 or so, and through today, I'm just one of those actors that I haven't been out of work. I just kept going from one show to another, and continued to do theater too. I belonged to a group there called the Melrose Theater that had quite a few celebrities, if you want to say today. Actually, I prefer to call them really good actors. That were there. Tommy Lee Jones was in the group there at the Melrose Theater, and what's his name? Who won it? Richard Dreyfuss. Karen, I can't think of Karen's last name. She had a series. Richard Bull, who went on to do A Little House on the Prairie, and those of Don Eichner was there, and George Murdoch was there, Jennifer Rhodes was there, quite a few of actors that went on to do quite a bit. And so I did some plays there at the theater, but continued to do my film work. And in those days, you could get hired to go out and do guest artist stuff if you had any exposure on television, and that was kind of fun because you would go to these colleges or universities, and they would have the students would be rehearsing the play before you got there, and you would get there, and you'd have about 2 weeks. You'd be doing the lead role, and you'd have about 2 weeks to rehearse with the students, and then you would do the show for a week or two, and that was always, in those days, that was really a lot of fun. So
Jordan,
that's been kind of
Jordan, wait, I want to
kind
just
of it. And I had recurring roles on the streets of San Francisco, where I was a district attorney, Jerry Butler, and Jerry Billings. Got to get his name right. And then I went on to recur on a couple of other series. The one your listeners probably will certainly know, Matlock, with Andy Griffith. I did Lieutenant Harmon Andrews on the Matlock series for about 4 years. And once before, when you and I were talking, I told you during that time I was approached down there about doing my own radio talk show in Wilmington, North Carolina on WMFD. And I did it, and I loved it. I love your medium. And so I did that until they lost their tower. And the lady that had the lease on their tower kept telling them she wasn't going to renew it, and they didn't believe her. And, of course, she didn't renew it, and so they lost the tower, and that station had to go off the air while they were trying to get it back together. And they asked me if I would just switch over and do smooth jazz, which I enjoy listening to. But as you know, having an interactive radio talk show, when you go to doing smooth jazz, you're just paying the music and a couple of little tidbits. It really wasn't my thing. And then I had some other offers to do film, so I got out of radio and went back into my business. And that's when I developed the play, the Papa, the Man, the Myth, the Legend, and co-wrote that play with Ken Vos. Your listeners might remember a film he did called Grease Lightning with Richard Pryor. Ken wrote that, and Ken and I wrote Papa, the Man, the Myth, the Legend, had a 7-year tour with that, and then we filmed it. People can go to Amazon Prime right now, and they can actually either rent the DVD or whatever they do on Amazon Prime, or they can buy it, and did that. And during all that time, I got invited into that. I played some golf, and I got invited into the first it was the first Duke of Edinburgh award scheme golf tournament that was held in England. That was the pitted American celebrities versus European celebrities. And for some reason, because my Streets of San Francisco was playing over there, I was considered a celebrity. So,
Hey Jordan,
I went and joined what I call real celebrities: Telly Savalas, Fred McMurray, Robert Stack, Glenn Campbell, Richard Crenna, those guys. And I was on that American team, and that's when Ernie Borgnine was there, and that's when we went to Buckingham Palace and had that cocktail party there, hosted by Prince Philip. So it has been. It's really been a fun ride, and Jerry, you've actually introduced me to a publisher And
Yes.
I have been working on my book called Blue Collar Actor for some time, and I'm hoping to have that book out at least within another 8-9 months. We're hoping, and people can pick that up and get all of these stories and some of this stuff about me working with Al Lettieri when I was up in the mountains doing Mr. Majestic with him and Charlie Bronson and Al Lettieri. People remember him from The Godfather. Terrific guy, became a great friend of mine, and was a fun guy to be on the set with, as were all of these other people. And now with this, I one time before you and I were talking, and I used this term "frost my pumpkin," which has to do with all of the colleges and universities, and of course there are plenty there in New Jersey, all over New York here and everything. They have these students that come into their program, and the students, as your listeners may know, about 99% of the people that are drawn to this business are drawn to this business by the less than 2% of the business. In other words, 2% of the people, like Julia Roberts and, of course, Sean Penn and George, all of those names. And that's what draws them in. But they are less than 2% of the business. So the rest of the business is made up by, working actors, if you're fortunate enough that you can, be a working actor. And then there's so many of the actors that just kind of, they work periodically, but they're still dedicated and they're still trying to do it. So when young students want to kind of pursue this for a career, they don't have any mentors or any advisors that have any of the real world experience out there in this business. And so I'm just always amazed that I can't get these colleges or universities or drama departments, to have me come in and do my blue collar presentation and then spend some time talking to the young people that are seniors or maybe juniors, and they are all thinking about maybe they'd like to go into this business, and give them the reality of what the business is and how dedicated you have to be in the business and how you have to really stick at it. And once when somebody asked me did I consider myself a motivational speaker, I said, well, I don't know, but my feeling is that if I come out and talk to you, here this guy who came from let's say a lesser than well-to-do, we'll be honest here and say a poor family off a tobacco farm in North Carolina, and have come up through the ranks, so to speak, because I never had any connections. I didn't have a mother, father, sister, brother, aunt, uncle. Nobody was in the business. Okay. And when I was a young guy, in North Carolina, I mean, if you said to somebody down there that you think you wanted to be an actor, they would think you were crazy, because nobody knew what an actor was. What is that? And later on, when I got on all these TV shows and everything, some of my uncles, I remember once I went there, if you don't mind me telling these little stories, I went there to a family reunion, and Uncle Paul, one of my favorite uncles, came over to me, and I was quite successful in those days. I was doing a lot of television and had all the accoutrements that go with that. In California, I had a sailboat and 2-quarter horses and fancy cars and a nice house in Studio City. And Uncle Paul came over to me, and he says, hey, boy, he said, how you doing? I said, well, I'm doing fine, Uncle Paul. And he said, you still doing that acting stuff? And I said, yeah, I'm still doing the acting stuff. And he said, well, what are you doing to make a living? And I said, well, I make a decent living as an actor. And he said, yeah, they pay you pretty good for that? And this is a long time ago when you were getting about $5,000, for guest shots. And I said, yeah, I just did a show on a thing called the Night Stalker or whatever it was. And I said, he said, so what? I said, they paid me $5,000 for that. And that got his attention. He said, oh, $5,000? How long do you work? I said, about 5 days. And he said, holy mackerel. So that was the first time that he realized that maybe a guy could make a living as an actor. So it's been a fun run, but I've just, again, back to this thing, why the colleges and these drama schools and universities, I don't know if it's that the directors that run these programs there think that I want to come in and maybe take their job away. So I will let your listeners know I don't want their job. I have a job. I'm an actor, writer, and a director, so I don't want their job. but I'm more than willing to come there and talk to their young people and let them know what this business is really about, and then they can make a decision if they want to go through this, because unfortunately the business is one that you can spend your entire career working at and never really achieve a great deal. It's just the nature of the business. It's the way it is, and not everybody becomes a star. And I sometimes like to tell them that, being stars and being celebrities, you got to remember the Kardashians are celebrities. The Jersey people are celebrities. So if that's what you want to be, I'm not sure that acting's for you. And most of the actors that are stars that I know, quite a few of them I made the rounds with here in New York, they all kind of much say the same thing. When they started in the business, they just wanted to work. They weren't looking to be movie stars. And, of course, as it turned out, some of those people did become real movie stars in the sense that they won Oscars and all of that kind of thing. But that, and let me let your listeners know this, because it's the holidays. And also, my agent that handles me for this would say to me, why didn't you say something about that? There is a website called Cameo. And you can go to cameo.com/JRhodes7, and there are lots of stars on there. And let's say you want to give somebody a gift of what's called a shout-out. And, Jerry, you probably know more about that than I do. But a shout-out is that we give somebody, they call up and they hire us to do that for a fee. And then we say to somebody for a happy anniversary or a happy birthday or for whatever occasion, we give them a shout-out. And you do it as either a character from one of the shows or whatever you want to do. So anybody that's out there that's interesting, that's called Cameo. And it's cameo.com/JRhodes7. So now I'll get my agent off my back when she says to me, you're on the radio. Why didn't you say something about that?
Of course.
So I did. You have any questions that you'd like to ask me before I talk up your entire show here?
So, well, the show is yours today, but I want to just give someone a shout out and tell you who. Can you hear me okay, Jordan?
I'm sorry?
I don't think he can hear me. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay sometimes. Other times you fade.
I thought so. We're going to have Doc G try to fix this. Yes. I didn't think you could hear me. Okay. So I want to give a shout out to you and to someone and let you know who's watching this show. Al Contrare from the Mystics. Remember the song Hushabye? Jordan can't hear me.
Say that last part again.
All right. Can you hear me now, Jordan?
Yep, I can hear you now.
Okay, now we're good. So Al Contrare from the Mystics is watching the song Hushabye. Remember that song?
Uh-huh.
He's watching. So I wanted to just let you know that.
Okay. Well, I can say hello.
Hello. There you go. Doc G would like to ask you something.
I did want to ask you, can you hear me okay, Jordan?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to ask you, because of all the accomplishments that you've done over the period of years, and this is kind of just a mundane question, but what sign are you? Are you a Gemini or are you a Sagittarius? Who are you?
I'm a Gemini.
Now, see, that's why Jerry and I are the same way, because we do the same thing. We never stop.
I'm a Pisces, and we're the same. Listen.
No, but I mean, it's the same thing.
Right.
We're just like, we never stop. We always look for another benefit or another person that needs help or something else we can do. Or it's just like, I guess it's in our blood, right, Jordan? I mean, because you were like this since day one, it seems like.
Crazy.
Jordan, you still there?
Wait, I think I know what's going on. Jordan, do you have in the background, do you have the show playing?
I think we lost him.
Something's going on. Guys, I'm sorry. Forgive us for this, my listeners. Yeah, we're having a problem with this connection. So, guys, we're waiting to get reconnected with Jordan. Yeah. Oh.
You not hear me here. We don't hear
him way in the background.
Okay, now I hear him. Jordan,
Yeah.
Hi, Jordan. Can you hear us?
now I can hear Jordan. We lost you.
Yeah, we did. What happened?
You lost me.
Yes, we couldn't hear you at all.
And for how long? How long did you lose me?
Just 2 minutes.
Yeah, just a few minutes.
Just
yeah.
while Doc G was talking
I was still
to
asking
you.
you a question.
So he'll ask you the question again.
Okay.
You
It had something to do with my birth sign, didn't it?
No, yeah, but I use a Gemini. I got that. And then I asked you, I said, well, going back, from day one, you must have been like that. Or did you just acquire to be like that? Some people, they just start doing different things. I know when I started out, I was I used to stack hay at a farm. And then from then I just kept doing everything and everything and everything and never stopped. You wear so many hats that people think you're crazy.
So do I. Yes.
Well, when I was a young fella, obviously, the few times that we would get into town to go to a movie on Saturday night after working in the tobacco fields all week, or in my case, when I was younger, I didn't work in the fields. I worked in the tying shed, where you'd either be a hander or a tyer or something like that. Later on, as I got a little older, I was able to drive the tobacco sled, which I really enjoyed, because you could pretend to be John Wayne and all that kind of stuff with you and your trusty steed out there, which was a mule, pulling a tobacco sled. But I had always kind of had this dream that, not that I wanted to be an actor, but that I wanted to be a cowboy. I had seen these westerns, and I'd even met a couple of them that come around, and during the end of their heyday, they were making personal appearances. But it wasn't until I was in Durham, North Carolina, living at my grandmother's boarding house, actually, because I left home at a pretty early age. My dad, not to get into a lot of downers here, but my dad kind of let the booze get the best of him. And anyway, I left home and I went and lived at my grandmother's boarding house. And at her boarding house there, I did a lot of work. Even when I was in school, I belonged in a program. I signed up for a program called DO or DE. It was Diversified Occupation or Diversified Education. And that meant that you went to school at 8 o'clock in the morning, you got out at noon, and I went to a job at 12:30. So I would get up in the morning, and of course I wanted to have some money, so I did more than that. I had a paper route that I had to get up about 5 o'clock in the morning to take the paper route, and then I would come back and get ready for school, go to school from 8 till noon, get out of school at noon, come back to my grandmother's boarding house, have lunch, and then I would go to Belt Leggett's, where I worked in the shoe department as a salesperson there until 5 o'clock. And then I would get off at 5 and go back to my grandmother's house, have some dinner, and then I'd go to the Carolina Theater at 6 o'clock and work as an usher from 6 to 10:30, and then go back home and do it all over again the next day. And in the process of doing that, I saw James Dean in East of Eden, and I really couldn't figure out what it was that he did, but I thought I would like to do that. And then, as you probably remember, shortly after that film was premiered, he got killed in the car wreck before even his second film came out, after he'd already finished his third film. And for some reason, that motivated me to decide to go up to Baltimore, Maryland, and find my dad, who was living on Skid Row, to go up there and find him, and that's when I got involved in the theater. And from that point on, once I got involved in the theater, I just realized that it was what I really wanted to do. And I believe, I'll tell you guys something. Is everybody still being able to hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
We hear you better now. We can hear you better now.
Okay,
Yeah.
I really believe the first bug that bit me was in the 7th grade, when a guy came around to the schools, and he had a play, and it was an operetta. It was called Tom Sawyer Operetta. And he came to the 7th grade, where I was there. It was Hope Valley High is the name of the school, right out on the outskirts of Durham, North Carolina. And he came, and the teacher, Mrs. Valentine, she said that she really wanted her class to do this play. And she said to the guy, and I have the perfect student to do Tom Sawyer. And she said that was me. And of course, in the back of the room, which is where I sat, I said, I don't do no dumb play. anyway, she decided a way to get me to do the play. She knew I was sweet on a little girl in there, whose name actually was Becky, and she was going to have Becky play the role of Becky, which is Tom Sawyer's girlfriend in the Tom Sawyer story. And she said if I would do the play for her, it was a musical,
Okay.
and if I would rehearse every day down in the room there, which she actually could walk out of her classroom and look down into the gymnasium through the glass and see us down there. She said if I would do that, she wouldn't give me any homework for the entire time that I was working on the play. So I was in show business then. I decided that okay, that's no homework, and I get to work opposite this little girl I was sweet on. And I believe the first time I was truly bitten by the performing bug was during the course of that play when I realized on stage that I could control an audience and make them gasp or laugh or feel something by what I was doing on stage, and that was in the 7th grade.
Right.
And I never did anything. I didn't, during high school, I never got involved in the drama program, which made another teacher I had, Mrs. Sarles, whom I really liked, quite a pretty lady. And she told me years later when I came back to Durham for something there, they interviewed me for the paper. I came back to see my mom, and I ran into Mrs. Sarles, and she said, I cannot believe that I could never get you involved in the theater program here in school, and you go off and become a professional actor. And so I think that 7th grade may have been the first time I really got bitten, if that answers the question about how I got into this. And I only took one fork in the road, if you want to call it that, and that is in the very late 50s. Folk singing was a big thing, and I somehow wound up singing with a buddy of mine, and through a whole just unbelievable set of circumstances, we got signed by Don Seat Management, who managed Conway Twitty before he went into country music, and the Four Freshmen and some other people. And for a short while, we were the Castaways. And we were a folk singing group that was just 2 of us, a duo. He played a 12-string guitar, I played a 6-string guitar. And I had a friend who remembered this, a gentleman I met at a guitar store here. I couldn't believe he remembered the Castaways, but he did. And he said, I remember you guys. I remember the songs you had. And he said, did you cut albums? And I said, no, I have to correct you. We cut an album.
An album.
And I believe they sold it in Brazilian supermarkets. But anyway, so I had that one little deviation, that one little turnoff there that was still in show business, but I wasn't working as an actor. But that's when I did the Castaways. So if any of your listeners out here and call in remember the Castaways, we should give them something. We should have some kind of an award for them. I don't think anybody.
I remember
Doc
the
G gets the
Castaways.
award.
Liar,
Yeah.
liar.
There it is.
Oh, come on, the
Well,
Castaways.
I went into Sam Ash because I was actually trading in one of my guitars. I just kept one guitar. And that's when I met Dave down there. And he's the guitar guy. And, he restrings them and makes sure they're all good. And I got to talking to him, and he said something about my guitar. And I said, when I used to have a folk singing act, called the Castaways. And he said to me, the Castaways? He said, I remember the Castaways. And I said, oh, come on, man. He said, yeah. And then he started naming some of our songs.
Liar, liar.
900 Miles.
Uh-huh.
I'm sorry?
Liar, liar.
You cut out me there again.
I know.
He said, liar, liar. Can you hear us?
Oh yeah. I said liar, liar. And anyway, he said he wanted a picture, and Jerry, I sent you one. In fact, I think I sent you 2 of those pictures
Yes.
of the Castaways.
Yes.
Of me and Michael Ewen. And anyway, I took him. I found the picture because I've saved a bunch of those pictures that I want to have put in my book when I finish my book. And I took it down there to him, and I cannot believe it. He put it right up on the thing next to Kiss.
That's great.
So when people come in his guitar place there, they look there and they see the Castaways right next to Kiss, and of course there's a bunch of real music stars there, and I got a big kick out of that. As I still today, when I go and do these conventions, I think I mentioned earlier that Jerry Nolan now is my promoter and booking manager in these conventions, which is where where you and I met.
That's right.
And I still get a really, I don't think I'll ever get over it. The first time I ever did one, which was a little over 3 years ago, and had these fans come up and remember shows that I was on, that I had even forgotten. And they come up and they start, and they can tell you the show, and they say, and this is what happened, and all of that stuff. And I'm very appreciative of that. And I don't believe I have ever, nor would I ever be rude to any of those people. I know some, I guess as the bigger you get, I don't know, I don't think it would happen to me, but I've always been appreciative that people would come up and even, I'm very thankful if they remember me and come up and say things like, and of course, during my career and traveling around, I've always had people do things like on airplanes and be looking at me, and finally say something about, "You're an actor, right?" And I had a guy do that once to me, and I said, "Yeah," and he turned to his wife and said, "I told you that guy was an actor. I knew that. I've seen that guy." So I became that guy.
That guy. That's great. Jordan.
But, I love what I do, and I've been lucky to work with some. The thrill that I got out of working with John Wayne.
Okay,
wait,
Jordan, wait. That's who I was going to ask you about. Okay, so listen, we want to know, even Doc G, we want to know all about you working with John Wayne, baby.
Oh,
The dude.
man.
Okay, all right. Well, here the first story about John Wayne before I ever worked with him is I was working as a page in the Four Seasons here in New York, a struggling actor, and he came into it was a big party there, and he of course was one of the guests along with other actors too, but John Wayne was just in real life was just like he is on the screen. First of all, he's a very big man. He was a legitimate 6 foot 6 inches tall, and he was just as big in person as he was on the screen. And I was working there as a page, and they had positioned me that particular night to be down on the entry level when you came in. When you come down the stairs, these not revolving, but this little staircase that came down. And as John Wayne was leaving the party, he was coming down the steps, I turned to my buddy who was working inside the hat check room there, and I looked up and I told him, I said, get John Wayne's hat. It's right up there. And he said, "How do you know that's his hat?" And I said, "Look at it, man. It's the only one that's a big brim hat. Everybody's a little brim. He's a big brim." So he had his hat laying down there, and John Wayne comes walking up to the counter, and it's radio, so I can do his walk. And he comes walking up, and his hat was sitting there waiting for him. So he looked at my buddy behind the thing, and he looked over at me, and he said, "You remembered my hat, huh?" And we said, "Yes, sir." And then he reached in his pocket, and believe me, this is true. He reached in his pocket, he took out a $5 bill, he threw it down, picked his hat up, set his hat on his head, and looked at the two of us and said, "Buy yourself a cigar." And that's what he said, a cigar. He didn't say a cigar. He said, "Buy yourself a cigar." And then he turned around and he did his John Wayne walk out the door. Okay, segue years later now. I'm in California, and I'm working, and I'm doing really well, and my agent calls me up, and he says, "Jordan," he said, "look," he said, "I just got a call for you." He said, "I don't know if you want to do this or not." He said, "It's a television thing over here, and it's called John Wayne's America or something." I said, wait a minute, John Wayne? And he said, "Yeah." And he said, "But it's just one day." And he said, "Everybody's doing these one day kind of bit thing." I said, whoa. "You telling me I get to work with John Wayne?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "I want to do it." He said, "Well, let me tell you how much it is." I said, "I don't care how much it is." He said, "What they're paying?" I said, "I don't care." I said,
Right.
To work with John Wayne,
Right.
even if they didn't pay me. He said, "Well, they're going to pay you."
Yeah.
So I got the job on, I think it's called John Wayne's America or something. People can get it on YouTube these days. And I play the guy from Mississippi. I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
But I remember, so I'm on the set, and John Wayne, of course, he told me to call him Duke, but I still feel weird about that. But he was over talking he had about 3 or 4 of his buddies there, and he was actually patting his girth and talking about what his weight was down to. He was down to about 255 pounds or something.
Okay.
But he's a big man.
Yes.
And so I walked over to him, and when he was all finished with him, I said, "Mr. Wayne," I said, "Hi." I said, "Jordan Rhodes." And he said, "You're working on the show, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Call me Duke." And I said, "Okay." I said, the first time I ever saw you, didn't really meet you, I said, I was working at a hat check room at the Four Seasons when you came there for this party. And he goes, "About 4 seasons?" "Oh, yeah, I remember that." And I said, "Yeah, I was doing the thing." And he said, "Yeah." He said, "That was a lot of fun." And then we started chatting for a minute. So that was my big thing about working with John Wayne. And then later on, I don't know why, but I always gravitated toward the stunt guys, and which is the reason I did some of my. I did not do quote my own stunts per se, but I did do a lot of my own close work, like getting tossed up on the trunk of on the hood of a truck or something like that, and having Bud Eakins jerk me out of a moving dune buggy. I did stuff, and I enjoyed that. I really did. I like to do that, and I got to be very friendly with a lot of stunt guys, and heard some really great stories about John Wayne when he was on location, and how he looked after his crew and everybody, and was really was a terrific guy, much bigger than life. And the same thing really with. I was not in awe of him, not really. I mean, I was very, very thrilled. I was just thrilled to death that I was working with him. But I guess I'm going to have to rephrase that. I guess I was somewhat in awe of him. Yeah. And it's only been like 2 stars that I've ever worked with that happened. One was John Wayne. The other was Gregory Peck. When I did Maroon with Gregory Peck, I had one of my scenes in Maroon is that I had some lines with him. And I remember at the time, I was just petrified that I was going to blow these lines, and it was a huge setup. John Sturgis was directing. It was a huge camera move, and we came down, and the way the camera went around and all this thing, and we were at the end of that scene when he looks over at me and asks me a question, and I think my answer was the glycol radiators are normal. Or something like that. And I remember at the time just thinking, oh, man, don't blow this line. This is a big thing. But it was Gregory Peck. And I was impressed by him because he was the only star in those days that I ever knew that had his own hair guy that used to come to him before these shots. And you know how Gregory Peck always had that little flip to his hair in the front that kind of flipped over?
Yep.
He had a guy that actually would come and do that, and I was really impressed with that. I thought, man, you are really big in this business when you can have a guy that comes over and flips your hair, that gets your hair to have that certain little look with it.
That is great.
I've been so lucky because I've worked with so many of these people, and actually had nice relationships. I've known Robert Wagner. I've known Robert Wagner for years.
Crazy.
And I've worked with him in just about all of his shows. Telly Savalas, I knew for years. Of course, Glenn Campbell, I knew shortly for a short while. But other people, Chuck Connors, you guys remember Rifleman and that kind of thing. Chuck Connors and I were friends for years, and he did my first documentary that I wrote, produced, and directed called The American Cowboy. And Chuck was the only actor in that. We went to Oklahoma and filmed that on a 25,000-acre cattle ranch. But Chuck and I lived up in a place called Bear Valley Springs in California, which is up in the Sierra Nevada mountain range up there. And I knew Chuck for years, and just having a friendship with those people that, out and about, we're all stars, and working with somebody like Charlie Bronson on 2 different films at 2 different times over a 20-year span, actually. And then I've known Sean Penn since Sean's about 14 years old, and he gives me credit. I mean, I certainly did help him get it. I had nothing to do with his talent. Okay. I mean, his talent is phenomenal, but I did get him his first off-Broadway show, which led on to him doing a lot of the other stuff that he did. But it's just nice to. In fact, the other day, I looked here. I haven't called him back yet. I got Robert Wagner called me on I saw my caller ID that he had called. He didn't leave a message, but I have to now call him back, and because I'm talking to him about he's going to do one of these films for me if I can ever get the financing. But it's just been fun. It's been when you years and years ago I met George Burns, and I was really taken with him because he made a point of saying to all of us young people. He said, try to fall in love with your work, because most of us are going to have to work for a living. And if you fall in love with your work, it'll just be so much easier. And he was absolutely right, because if you, just like you guys, if you love what you do, it doesn't make going to work seem like you're going to work. It's what you do.
Right. So I have to tell you something. We have someone that was trying to call in. We're not taking calls, sweetheart. I'm sorry.
his daughter.
It's your daughter. Cheyenne wants
my
to say
goodness,
hello to you.
Cheyenne.
Cheyenne, we can't take a call. We're having some technical difficulties, sweetheart, and that's why we can't take any calls with your dad right now. But say hello to your daughter.
Well, let me at least say hello to my.
Yes, say
I
hello.
can do it on air. I can say hello to my daughter,
Yes.
Cheyenne Rhodes, and of course my two grandsons, Chayton and Declan, 5 and 10, 5 and 11. Oh boy, I might get in trouble with Chayton on that one. I hope I didn't get his age wrong. Great kids. I'm so proud of my daughter. I cannot tell you. My daughter works for the American School for the Deaf in Hartford,
wow.
Connecticut, and she probably won't like me saying this, but she's pretty big there, and she just helps an awful lot of young people and people that are, obviously she works with the deaf, and I know she's listening, so she'll get a kick out of this.
Yeah.
I used to have an old flip style phone, and Cheyenne was always texting me, and she said to me, "Dad, you've got to get an iPhone because I can't text you on this flip style phone you got, so get an iPhone." So Dad says to her one day when he gets his iPhone, and he says to her, "Okay, I'm gonna get an iPhone." I said, but honey, tell me, why do you text so much? And my daughter says to me, "Dad, I work with the deaf. Why do you think I text so much?"
Wait, I have to say something.
That's
Wait
my
a
daughter.
minute.
Love her to death.
Wait, I have to say something to you, Jordan.
I'm happy to say that we have had a great father-daughter relationship my entire life, which is and obviously includes her entire life. So, honey, I love you. If you're out there listening, and give the boys a kiss and a hug for me, and tell them that Papu, which is what I'm known to my grandsons, Papu will see them when you guys go on the cruise. You guys are going on a cruise in a couple of weeks. So, and Jerry, thank you for telling me that my daughter had called in.
Jordan, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, because I wanted to cut in a minute. I don't want Cheyenne to not hear this. I want to say something to your daughter, okay? First of all, Cheyenne, I think you're beautiful for working with the deaf. And what you just said about texting just put a different perspective on that for me. I'm not a texter. I don't really text too much. And sometimes I love technology and sometimes I hate it. But now that you just said that, thank God for texting, right? Because look at the outlet we have
Sign
now.
language is the other thing.
Yes.
It's not communication.
So it's beautiful. You're a beautiful person.
God bless you, Cheyenne.
God bless you is right, Cheyenne. And I love your dad. I love your dad. Jordan, you have some other entertainers watching. Pablo Reyes, I'm giving him a shout out.
Hey,
He's
Pablo.
an incredible singer. You have some other entertainers here also. You have a young entertainer, Ryan Henry, who is watching the show. And he is on Miss Maisel, right? He's on that show. What would you say to him, to Ryan?
Which show is he on?
I think it's called The Amazing Miss Maisel. It's
wow,
yes.
that's a terrific show.
Okay, so you know it. Okay, good. I didn't mess that up. Yes.
Is he recurring on the show, or is he a regular on the show?
He's recurring on it. He's actually a relative of mine, a cousin's son. So he's watching. So say something to him. What would you say to him for encouragement?
Well, for encouragement, I would say if you're already recurring on really a terrific show, a hit show, by all means, stay with it. Always, you probably do this anyway, but always conduct yourself as a professional, even when other people around you don't act as professionals. If you sometimes run into some people that are true people, and this doesn't happen very often, but if you do and they're not conducting themselves as professionals, don't let that affect you. You it'll always come back to you in spades if you treat the crew people and all the people that you work with as a professional and really just kind of stay on your toes with that. That is always... That pays dividends down the road. That believe me, it's not bad in this business to be known as a nice guy. I know they say nice guys finish last. Don't believe it. It's always good to be known as a nice guy. And if you do that, I just think it'll come back to pay you dividends in the long run, because I know a lot of work that I got, and there's stories about people. I did not get to meet them, but many of the old actors used to say things like, I think James Cagney was one of the ones that said, always be on time, know your lines, plant your feet, look the other guy straight in the eye, and tell the truth.
Wow.
And that's a tremendous acting lesson right there. The only thing I would add to that, and not this is no dig on Mr. Cagney, he was great, is that when he says know your lines, I always like to say to actors, learn your lines and know what you're saying. Because John Derrick told me, I don't know if anybody out there remembers John Derrick, a very handsome guy who was married to Bo Derrick, along with a bevy of other beautiful women. But John Derrick told me once he was working with James Cagney in a Western, and he got one of the best acting lessons he ever got. They were rehearsing the scene, and they were getting ready to shoot the scene, and James Cagney came over to him, and he said, kid, you're not seeing me. And John Derrick said, no, Mr. Cagney, no, I'm looking right at you. And Cagney said, yeah, you're looking at me, but you're not seeing me. And John Derrick said that was a great lesson he got, because obviously what John was doing while he was paying attention to James Cagney is he was thinking more about what he was getting ready to say back to him rather than really seeing Cagney. So those are the only tidbits I could give you. And hey, what can I tell you anyway? You're recurring on a great show, and I'm not recurring on a show these days. So you're two rungs up above me already. And I would just say congratulations to you. That's great, and that is a terrific show. And I know that show is just full of professionals, and that's great. So that's about the best thing that I could tell him. And don't get discouraged if when you finish this recurring on this, if you don't get into something else right away, just go out there and and make yourself, and don't be afraid to ask people about work. I know early in my career I was very hesitant to approach a producer or a director at a party or something, and one producer came up to me one time after seeing me at a party and said to me, I ran this thing over here. He said, I got a question for you, Jordan. And I said, what's that? And he said, why didn't you came? He said, you didn't ask me for any work or anything at that party. And I said, well, I didn't. He said, you're an actor. That's what you're supposed to do. I'm a producer. I can give you work. And he did. He wound up putting me in Mr. Majestic. But don't ever hesitate. As long as you do it in a courteous and a nice way, it'll always be remembered. If you're nice to people, it will always be remembered. If you're really crappy to people, it will be more than remembered. So just that's the best advice I can give somebody. Particularly, I almost feel I'm I have a lot of humility here when I'm trying to give somebody who has a recurring role on a series advice about what they should be doing in the business. Okay. But if you love it, stick with it.
Jordan,
just try to get that next job.
Jordan, I wanted to ask you. You said you were in Mr. Majestic. What part did you play in that? Do you remember?
Oh, sure. I played Hal Ritchie. I was the sheriff's deputy that hounded him. Not hounded him. I followed him all through the film, and just the whole wherever Charlie was, that's where Hal Ritchie was. And I was also the one that arrested him in the very beginning when he had beaten up not beaten, he had whipped Paul Coslow's character. And I went out to the watermelon place where he was, the watermelon farm, and I arrested him. And that was my first encounter with Mr. Bronson. But I'll tell you, even in those days when Charlie was not the most congenial of people to know, he was an absolute professional, and he was great to work with. Really knew what he was doing, and a lot of people didn't realize how hard he had it coming up. And then, of course, later in his life, he had so much tragedy with his wife Jill dying of cancer. And then what a lot of the public doesn't know is that one of his sons did an overdose on drugs, And the other one that really, really hurt Charlie is Charlie had a big farm in Connecticut, and he wanted his son to come up there and live with him. And his son came up there, but he wouldn't really live in the house with him. He wanted to get a trailer, and he put the trailer on the outskirts of the property right next to the fence. And then, unfortunately, for what reasons I certainly don't know, he wound up committing suicide. He shot himself with a shotgun.
Wow.
And those things, that's what had happened to Charlie before I did the Indian Runner with Charlie. And I don't mind, I'm kind of proud of this story because when Charlie was coming on the set, I'd gotten a phone call from Sean and also from Tom Mount, the producer, and they said, you've worked with Charlie before. They said, is there anything you can tell us about him that might help us, make things go smooth? And I said, Charlie's an ultimate professional, and he'll do that. I said, I can tell you right now, when he goes to do wardrobe, Charlie's funny. He doesn't like to try on outfits. He likes to try on all the pants, and he likes to try on. They said, yeah, we've already found out about that. So when I knew he was coming in, I decided I would welcome him to the show. So I wrote him a note, because we both stayed in the same hotel. I wrote him a note, and I left it down at the front desk for him. And I basically just said I wanted to welcome him to the set. Been a long time since we'd worked together, and I wanted to give him my condolences, for the sadness that had infected his life that he had. And that was there. I don't remember it verbatim, and anyway, I signed it. And it was just, I had no idea how it was going to go, because I figured it could go one of two ways, actually one of three ways. That Charlie could read it and say, oh, okay, that's nice, and leave it alone. Or he could read it and he'd come in my face and say, what are you doing getting in my personal business? Or he could, say thank you. So I just didn't care. It was something I wanted to do. And when I came down the next morning, Charlie, he had an earlier call than I did. It was his first day on the set. I had already been working a week or two. And I came down, and instead of my driver being there for me, Tom Mount and Philip, the other producer, were both there to pick me up in their car, which I thought was kind of strange. But they said, come on, we'll give you a ride. I said, oh, great. So I get in the car, and Tom Mount's sitting in the front, and I'm sitting in the back with Philip. And Tom turned around to me in the front seat in the car as we were driving out there, and he said, Jordan, I want to thank you. He said, that was a very nice thing you did for Charlie. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, that note that you left him welcoming him to the set and everything and to the shoot. And I said, how do you know about that? And he said, well, we picked up Charlie this morning. He wouldn't stop talking about it. He said he remembered you from Mr. Majestic. And so, I certainly made me feel fine. And then when I got out to the set, as I went to walk around by one of the trailers, he was coming out of his trailer, and he said, hi, Jordan. And I said, hi, Charlie. Came up, we shook hands, and we really had a real nice, relationship by the time he was on the film there playing David Morris's father, who in the film kills himself. And I know when I was in Wilmington, North Carolina, and he passed away, a reporter called me up and said they knew that I had worked with him. Would I be interested, or would I consider doing an interview about him and about working with him? And I was happy to do it, because a lot of people had really, kind of ragged on him over the years about how he was. But I was happy to do the interview and tell them what, how he was to me. And that's how I judge anybody, is how they treat me. And he was great. And I enjoyed working with him, because, as I said, he really was professional. He really knew his stuff. And there's another tidbit about Charlie Bronson that most of the public certainly does not know. Charlie Bronson was the first actor to be paid $1 million per film.
What?
Plus a percentage of the gross, not the net, of the gross. And the reason for that is because producers knew that regardless of what his films would do in America, his international prowess was just absolutely unbelievable. All of these foreign countries he went into, because Charlie was Polish, because his real last name was Brzezinski. But these countries just adopted him. The Germans insisted he was German. The Spanish insisted he was Spanish. Mexicans said he was Mexican. Just all of these, the Nordic companies, to say he was Nordic, everybody thought that he was, whatever their particular country was, and his films just did tremendous business in those countries. And that's why he was the first actor to do that. I know later on, of course, Elizabeth Taylor got $1 million for Cleopatra, but I mean, Charlie back in the days when that was a lot of money. I mean, today,
Crazy.
turn around today and you read about Robert Downey, who's a terrific actor, Robert Downey Jr., but getting $50 million for Iron Man is like, I mean, but back in those days, $1 million for a film plus that percentage of the gross was really something, and the reason that Charlie was able, really to do so well. And of course, I was a big, as a fan, I was a big fan of his. I loved his films.
Crazy. Want to ask him about Charles Bronson?
No, we just did.
Oh.
Jimmy Stewart.
Oh, Jimmy Stewart.
We're big fans of Jimmy Stewart because it's coming up Christmas time. It's a Wonderful Life is getting ready to come on TV, and Jimmy Stewart was just a fantastic actor.
I gotta tell you, I never met Jimmy. I mean, I did meet Jimmy, but I never worked with him.
That's a good Jimmy Stewart.
But I met him once.
Yeah, that's great.
I met him once on. I was actually writing for Hollywood Squares, and I met him on. He was doing somebody's television show there, and I was able to meet him, but I never got to work with him. I regret never working with him. I regret never working with Gary Cooper, and Cagney, those guys. But I did work with John Wayne. And so I got him there. And, of course, I've worked with Sean Penn, both as an actor, and also I worked for him when he was a director. He directed The Indian Runner, which he also wrote. But Jimmy Stewart had a terrific reputation and was just a great guy. And I would also have to say this, that I never worked with him, but the times I met Rock Hudson was a consummate gentleman. I mean, he was quite a terrific guy. And I know once he, got AIDS and all that, there was a lot of funny jokes and things made about him. But he was the times he came down. He saw me in a couple of plays in Hollywood at the Melrose Theater. And he always came backstage, and he's a very nice guy.
But Jordan, you said you wrote for the Hollywood Squares with you wrote for all the people with the jokes and stuff. How did that work?
As a matter of fact, when I was out in California, I was doing okay. I hadn't really, I hadn't gotten that role on Welby yet, but I was doing all right. And Les Roberts, who was one of the head writers on Hollywood Squares, and also a producer, became one of the working producers. He and Quigley were the two main producers, of course, for the show. But I knew Les from New York when I had to work here. And I was with Les one day, and I said to him he said, "What have you been doing?" I said, "Well, I did a 12 o'clock high, and I'm doing this, and I said, I'm just trying to stay afloat as an actor." And he said, "Have you ever watched Hollywood Squares?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Do me a favor." He said, "Watch Hollywood Squares a couple of times and write me about 10 or 12 questions." And he said, write me 10 or 12 questions. He said, "I might be able to give you a job." So I went home and I watched Hollywood Squares, and I thought, okay, I can do this. So I wrote him about, 15 questions, I think, and went out, met with him, gave him the questions. He met with the other people that were writers and producers there with the show. They were all had these associate producers things. And he came back and he said, "Okay, so I'm going to hire you." He said, "You got to write 25 questions a week to start out with." And he said, "We'll pay you $125. And he said, "And we need a buy rate of about 15, 20%, whatever." He said, "And then we'll see if we want to, take it up from there." So I said, okay. So I would go down to the library. And he said something about coming into the office. And I said, "Les, do you mind if I don't come into the office? I just work, at home." And he said, "No, as long as you turn your questions in on Friday." And so I said, okay. So I would go down to the library in downtown L.A. on a Monday morning and go through a bunch of periodicals and things, and I'd write my questions. And I'm sorry, I said 25. It was 125. It was 125 questions to start with. And I'd write my 125 questions, and I'd be finished for the rest of the week to make rounds or do whatever. And on a Friday, I'd drive out to the San Fernando Valley, to the offices out there, and turn my questions in. And this is really braggadocio. But anyway, not at that time being a writer, I mean, of course, I've written since then, but not being a writer at that time, I had one of the longest records I worked for 14 weeks as a writer on the Hollywood Squares and became a writer for Paul Lynde, Cliff Arquette, and Wally Cox. And it was writing for Wally Cox was absolutely a joy because you could write the most esoteric questions in the world that Wally Cox would know the answer to. He never, very seldom had to bluff but if you ask him things like what won the Academy Award last year, he couldn't tell you. But if you ask him something about the sex habits of the Australian side crab or something, he would know the answer to that. And Wally was very helpful to me in learning how to do ADR and looping my films and stuff like that. But Paul Lynde, I got to write questions for him. And I wrote questions for his character. Cliff Arquette was his name, who actually was the grandfather of Patricia Arquette and Rosanna Arquette. Charlie Weaver was his character.
Okay. Charlie Weaver was awesome.
And of course, I got to know the host of that show, and even wound up in a convention a year ago. It'll be 2 years next September, but a year ago, last September, because he couldn't make it. I wound up sitting in for him with a gal who wrote the Paul Lynde book, which, by the way, I have an option on. I took an option on Paul Lynde's book. I'm trying to do a musical based on Paul Lynde's life, because Paul Lynde was one of the funniest men I've ever met in my life.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he really was genuinely, a really funny guy. Not just his delivery and his but I mean the stuff he could come up with off the top of his head would just kill you. And I got to know him quite well because he was a big fan of Elizabeth Allen, who is how I met my first wife, who was the mother of my daughter Cheyenne. I met Laura Wallace through Elizabeth Allen, and Elizabeth and Paul Lynde were very good friends. And a thing people may not know about Paul Lynde, he used to go out each summer on the Kenley circuit, which was this guy, I don't know his first name, his last name was Kenley, and it was basically touring summer stock, but way up the ladder. It was like the A class of stock. But Paul Lynde at that time was the only star. He was the highest paid star in that theatrical circuit that there was, because he always sold out his shows. They were absolute sellouts. And my ex-wife, who unfortunately has passed away now, but Laura was in a thing called My Daughter's Rated X with both Elizabeth Allen and Paul Lynde. And I got to see Paul all the time over at Elizabeth's house when she'd have these get-togethers. I don't want to call them parties because they were always get-togethers, and there were a lot of terrific people there. And in those days, Paul loved it because he could really be himself, and he loved to wear caftans, and he just he was a terrific guy. And I don't want to do it on the show, but I wrote what was considered to be got one of the biggest reactions that he ever did about what does a young single guy. How does a young single guy prepare the meat when he's making a big meal for someone? And Paul Lynde's answer to that brought the house down. And so I was the guy that wrote that.
I think I know the answer, but I'm not going to say it either.
Jordan, your daughter Cheyenne just typed something in. I want to read it to you, okay?
Sure.
She said, "My dad has millions of wonderful tales. He's lived an extraordinary life. Doc G and I are over here giggling, Cheyenne, because we're listening to your dad talk and we're thinking, who doesn't he know and what hasn't he done? I mean, this man is incredible, unbelievable. But I want to just say this. We are coming to the close of the show, guys. Jordan, we have 10 more minutes. I want you to say whatever else
thank you, guys.
Like
Let me do that first.
Okay.
Thank you guys very much for having me on. It's been a real pleasure.
Our pleasure.
Forget it. It's our pleasure. We thank you. And just Cheyenne, man, I love you. And your dad's incredible. But Jordan, tell everyone how they can, find you, get in touch with you, see what you're doing, and then you can tell us anything else you'd like to tell us to close the show.
Okay. They can go to www.jordanrhodes.com. And they can see a little montage there. They'll get my email. They'll see how they can get in touch with me. And I'm always, thank God, I still get a lot of fan requests and fan letters and people sending me stuff and asking me, would I sign this form and all of that. And I can tell them if they want to get a copy of Papa the Man, the Myth, the Legend, how they can do that. I'm certainly going to, through you, Jerry, I will let you know in January or whatever what's going on with my book.
Yes.
Which I hope to get finished.
Yes. Yes.
But that's a great way for them to get in touch with me. And for anybody that wants a shout out for a loved one, a couple, parents, whatever, that cameo.com/JRhodes7. Go on there and just to hook up and put the request in, and we'll do a shout out for somebody's anniversary, birthday, Christmas, whatever. And again, thank you guys very much for having me on. It's been a blast.
Jordan, one more question, because we're also an AM radio station, and we play a lot of oldies like Castaways. Could you do a ID directive for us for this is Hamilton Radio? Say this is Jordan Rhodes from the Castaways, and you're listening to Hamilton Radio. Could you do that favor for me, please?
Yeah, sure. You mean get you one of the? I've still got. I think I've got one of the demos, but there's one of our big things was walking down this track. I got tears in my eyes.
Oh, I remember that one
Trying to
too.
read a letter from my home. If this train runs me right, see my baby Saturday night. I'm 900 miles from my home. And that's I've got if you play that stuff through Jerry, I'll get you. Unfortunately, I don't have one of the albums. What I have are the first demos that we cut before we signed with Don Seat. Actually, that's what made Don Seat sign us, because we didn't know what a demo was when we first met him, and he asked us if we had a demo, and I said, "What's a demo?" And he told us what it was, so we went out and cut one.
No, but Jordan,
if I can get
Yeah,
that to you, I would love to. I guess you can do that stuff.
You can do
through
it.
emails.
You can do it right now.
No, right
on here.
now,
So what
a
I want you to
station
say
ID.
is, this is Jordan Rhodes from the Castaways, and you're listening to Hamilton Radio. Anything else you want to put
Right
on there is
now, he
fine.
just wants you to do a
just say it, so
station
this way I
ID
can
that
play
he
it,
can use.
and I can play your music, and I'll
Yes.
play that with it for you.
All right. Well, I will have to get that and figure out.
No,
how to
no,
introduce
Jordan,
that to my
just do it.
daughter
No,
and just
Jordan.
Figure out.
Jordan, listen, he just wants you to say now live, hello, everyone, this is Jordan Rhodes from Castaways. You're listening to Hamilton Radio.
Yeah, I don't need a studio. I can do it right
Right.
here, right now.
If you just say that.
Oh, sure. I can. You want me to say that right now?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Hi, this is Jordan Rhodes from the Castaways, coming to you from Hamilton Radio, and I've been talking with these people for the last hour.
Awesome.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Jordan,
Thank you so much.
I need to say thank you
Listen,
now.
I appreciate it.
Yes, I now need to say thank you, guys, before we're closing. So everybody out there, I want to thank all my listeners. I want to thank my viewers on Facebook. Share this video for me, please, guys.
Make it
Share it
viral.
everywhere.
Make it viral, guys.
Okay, make it go viral. Jordan Rhodes, okay? This man is a legend over 5 decades, okay? This man has worked with everyone, has met almost everyone. There's nothing this man hasn't done, okay? So you have just listened to Jordan Rhodes here today on the Jerry Petito Show on HamiltonRadio.net.
Yes, you have.
Thank you, Jordan. Okay.
Thank you,
so
Jordan.
guys,
And thank you to Hamilton Radio.
Thank you, my sir. Have a good night. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Let me know when we're off Facebook, guys. We off Facebook, guys? Hello?